Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
How do we inspire our kids to empathize when on the surface they act like they don't care? Is it a defense mechanism, an indicator, or something more? In this podcast, we explore ideas and tips that work. Hey everyone and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and today we're going to talk about inspire kids to empathize. This is episode 537. And if you've been listening in the last few weeks, you've heard the entire series. I've got one more to do after this, and that is a series on inspiring kids. Previous topics have been listen, learn, cooperate, succeed. This one is empathize. And the next one is going to be self-awareness. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, and that is Now Programs. You can check them out on their website at nowprograms.com. This evidence-based program helps students with learning differences. We so appreciate our sponsors. Well, here we go, the 5th episode in the series, and I really appreciate you listening. If you enjoy this podcast and the others on our network, please give us a shout out and share them on social media and with your friends. You know, sometimes it's difficult to discern what our kids think, and other times, oh my gosh, they're like an open book. In fact, we would probably be happier if we didn't know what they were thinking. I think sometimes we're puzzled by their actions. We can't figure them out because we know they could do so much better. I recently came across a post on Facebook that caused me to pause, not only because of all the responses, but because of the answers given by well-meaning parents. And as I started thinking about it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is an example of what I want to talk about in this podcast. To me, the answer was glaring and evident. But then I'm a mother of 5, now all adults, and a grandmother of 9 so far. I have a background in education, and I've done lots of volunteer work, both at church and in homeschool circles. And with our books, our Creation Science series, I've taught lots of workshops with kids. So I have a little bit of experience about kids and kind of the things they do, and I love them. I'm always blown away and amazed by kids. But one of the things in listening to what the parents were saying and reading these posts, I thought, oh my gosh, they're missing the boat. That's not the answer at all. But I read through the response after response, and their advice was fixed on the problem. So I'm going to give you the scenario and tell you what this is all about. So a mom posted something about she walked over to the table and saw a ketchup bottle on the ground. The top popped up and the ketchup dripping out in a pool on the floor. One of the children had done this, but of course none of the kids admitted guilt, and none of the other siblings had picked up the bottle. So she asked, "What is the heart issue?" And so instead of addressing that, what is a heart issue, the underlying cause why someone would do that, everybody started posting answers. So I'm going to give you some time to think about it. There's ketchup on the floor or, on the ground in the, I don't know where, in the kitchen or wherever the kids were eating, and nobody's going to admit to this problem. And she wanted to know, what is the heart issue? What is the root cause for this to happen? So you can think about your answer, pause this recording if you want more time. And I'm going to continue on. You can come back and hear the rest of it. So, do you have your answer? Okay, well, let's go through what some of the answers were given. There's a variation on this, is just a synopsis. So they were variations pretty much of punishing the child for the most part. Punish the children with no more ketchup for a time, or punish the children by taking away something fun, or make the kids pay for the ketchup. There's restitution, or find out who did it and punish just that child, or sit down and talk to the kids and let them know how wasteful it was, or make the kids clean up for a period of time. So there are many issues here, and obviously, all of these answers addressed the problem at hand, right? They didn't address the cause. Like, what caused the children in this family to walk over an open bottle of ketchup that was dripping on the floor? And hopefully it's a squeeze bottle, so it wasn't that bad. And hopefully it wasn't glass, so the glass broke. But what caused them to just leave it there? There's some obvious things. The kids ate, they cleaned up, good job. They took their plates, obviously they were doing this. Maybe mom was around. Maybe she was in the other room putting away food. We as parents can't sit there and police our kids every second, and good for this mom for teaching her kids responsibility to clean up after themselves. So something happened where this child wasn't able to hold the ketchup in his plate, maybe? I don't know. But somebody saw this happen and did nothing about it. Ultimately, the fault is on the child who dropped the ketchup, maybe trying to carry too many things, but still it happened. And as I was thinking about this and how I would answer the question, and I didn't post a response in case you're wondering, because while punishments and cleaning up and all of those things are possible options, they don't address what the mother asked. She asked about the heart, and wisely, she knew that punishment solved part of the problem. Maybe. I considered many different character flaws, but two that struck out were gratitude and empathy, the topic of this podcast. The lack of gratitude is stunning, and the lack of empathy is equally stunning. Many times, those of us, especially who live here in the United States, take things for granted. If we want ketchup, we go to the refrigerator and we get it, or on the shelf. If we run out of ketchup, we go to the store and we buy it. We don't often do without. Our family has been through many hurricanes, some very bad and others not so bad damage-wise, other than some trees, but Anytime we've had any kind of storms, we've had no power for at least 2 weeks and no cable service or any kind of television service, sometimes for more than a month. So my kids have had to learn through the years that they've had to do without. And while I would not wish a natural disaster on anybody's family, it's amazing what that teaches. Gratitude for the families providing for the needs of all should be recognized as a gift. But in the society in which we live, it's often forgotten. Again, we take things for granted. Empathy is a sense of feeling compassion for family members, for other people outside of the family, and each other. Helping each other when needed, but appreciating that while it may or may not be our fault, we can help because that is the right thing to do. Empathy means caring about another person. In this case, mom and dad who purchased the ketchup. How do we resolve an issue of a child's lacking empathy? Can you make somebody empathize? That would be very difficult. The issue can be resolved in as many different ways as the responses on the social media post. However, the crux of the issue is understanding family dynamics and how it works. In our homes, we assume everyone's on the same page, everyone has the same level of understanding. The simple exercise and the ketchup on the ground illustrates that no, kids just don't understand at all. They don't understand the work it took to buy that bottle of ketchup. That maybe when you bought that bottle of ketchup, you decided, you know what, I don't need that hand lotion I want to get this week or this month because the kids want ketchup. They may not understand the sacrifices that we go through, and many times we don't share that with our children because we don't want to burden them. We don't want to be these martyrs. Oh my gosh, look, I got you the ketchup and my hands are all, itchy and scratchy now because I don't have lotion. No, we as parents don't do that. But the fact of the matter is that our kids don't understand and they don't appreciate because they haven't had the opportunity to. And praise God in a way. It's a blessing that we may not have had to struggle. But sometimes it's important to explain how things happen in your family and how things come to be. Have you ever told your kids, no, we can't buy that at the grocery store? I remember we were going through a time where things were a little bit more difficult. We had moved into the house that my husband built, and he was owed a lot of favors, and it's a beautiful house. And yet we were struggling because we went from having a house paid off to now having a little bit of a mortgage. And so we were really concerned about saving money and paying our bills. And I remember telling the kids, before we went to the store, I would say, we're not going to buy a lot of extra things. Here are the things on our list, and we're just going to stick to our list. And one of my friends came up to me at a later date, and she said, oh my gosh, what are you telling your daughter? And I said, what did she say? And she said, well, Mom, we're poor now because we can't buy all these extra things at the store. So she was going around, I guess, telling her friends that we're poor people now. It's not, it's kind of funny now, but I was devastated at the time, very embarrassed, and went on to explain to my friend that no, we were just acclimating ourselves to the new house and just getting things in order, and we just weren't spending money on a lot of things. But it made an impact on my children. But it also illustrates the point that we don't go through lacking much. It illustrates the lack of understanding of the value of food. Recently, there was a dock worker strike, and everybody was predicting sky-high prices, supply chain breakdowns, and more. A devastating hurricane that actually went by Florida and just dumped a bunch of water where I live, and we did have some wind, but not nearly anything like Hurricane Ian that hit us badly. But it went up our coast and it devastated parts of Georgia and North Carolina. And my heart goes out to those people, and we are praying for them and helping them out as we can. But people were told, that this supply chain was going to, cause Christmas presents not to arrive on time. And I was thinking, you know what? If that's the worst that happens, maybe we'll learn to appreciate things better. Thankfully, with all the media coverage, the strike was partially resolved until January. And I was laughing because the date almost coincides with the new administration coming into office. So, as typical, things are kicked down the road. But truthfully, I was thankful that the dock workers got to go back to work, that the supply chain is not going to be broken more than it already is at times, and that the people who need it the worst are going to be able to get the things they need. But truthfully, it might take a dock worker strike to allow all of us to see that we should be grateful for what we have, appreciate the little things, and buy American products whenever we can. Yes, I know, some things can only be provided through overseas trade, yet you understand what I'm trying to illustrate here. To appreciate necessities, you must not have them. And how many people in large cities don't have what I take for granted, and that's a car? They have to use mass transportation. What if it doesn't work? The buses are running slow, or the subway doesn't work. Possibly some of you who are listening affects you. And how many people work at thankless jobs and are not appreciated? I'd say a large majority. Having the gift of empathy allows a person to see the other person's point of view. Does it mean we totally agree? Of course not. But it does give us some insight into how to best express our thoughts without the discussion devolving into insults. And that's what you can do with your kids. Use the ketchup example with your children. Ask them how they would handle it if they were parents. Typically, children have a much harsher idea of punishment than we do as parents. But use this as a springboard to explain the underlying cause. Part of the issue is a disregard for an item some people in the family use. It's a lack of caring or empathy that the ketchup could have been wasted. It's a lack of taking the initiative or responsibility as a member of the family. In this case, the action to pick up a bottle and clean it off and put it away, then clean up the mess, wouldn't have been that horrendous of an ordeal. But the best way to teach empathy and gratitude is by example. Did this mother flip out when her kids did something wrong? What if they spilled a drink at dinner or caused another mess? Perhaps the kids didn't say anything because they didn't want to be harshly punished. I remember having teenagers at a time when I had little kids around. And I remember cleaning up the spilled milk, the proverbial spilled milk, from under the high chair one day and thinking, oh my gosh, this is like nothing. This is no big deal. Because when you have little kids, you have little problems. And when you have big kids, you have bigger problems. But that doesn't preclude you talking to your children and having them take the responsibility. But it also is an indicator to look at how you're reacting. The child did something out of carelessness, but what is worse, it was the disregard of leaving it there. But the question is why? And that's something that you can ask your kids. Why would this kid do this? Explain the reason that you're upset to the children, if you can, quietly and rationally. And I have to tell you, there have been some times that my kids have done some things and I've said, look, I can't talk to you about it right now. I'm too upset. But we are going to discuss it, and I am going to pray about your punishment. And if you're a longtime podcast listener, then you know I've talked about this often. because I prayed at one point with a repeating offender, let's put it that way, that just could not do what he was told. And I remember him scoffing and saying, yeah, right, or something very uncontrite. And so I took some time and I prayed about it, and I came up with something that I felt like the Lord told me to tell him. And he was driving, and he had just, saved a bunch of money and had bought this truck. And so the punishment was he needed to put his truck keys in the laundry room where everybody else's car keys were in case we needed to move a car. And for some reason, he was keeping his keys upstairs because he didn't want anyone to drive his car or his truck. And he was so upset with that punishment. It worked. It got through to him. He understood I meant business and that his dad backed me up and we were following through. And he had to keep his keys there. And he asked, well, for how long? And I said indefinitely, because he had to learn that you don't go back and just do a little something to earn back a privilege, especially in this case where we have, we live on some acreage, and if a car needs to be moved, one of us needs to move the car without hunting down the other person and finding the keys. And that was kind of a family rule. So parents, pray about it. Ask God's help. What can you do to remedy the issue? And have your children understand the ramifications of that. As a parent, it's important that our kids understand justified anger or punishments. When I ask my kids, well, do you know why I'm angry, or do you know why you're in trouble? Typically, they said no. They had no idea. And when I asked them to think about it, they still had no idea. I had to spell it out. And then I had to say, can you tell me why I'm upset? And yes, sometimes they didn't know. And I don't know that it was always willful. I would say could be 50-50. But I want to liken it to this. One of my friends was recently telling me about something that happened, and praise God, she was healed. Her husband's a doctor, took x-rays. There was one of these situations of there was no hope. He sent it to his brother. My friend told me this situation 6 months later, that she thought she was going to die for a whole day, an evening, until she was able to go in the next day, and the CAT scan showed that all of the x-rays from the previous day of her body, which they had side by side, the second day's x-rays or CAT scan, I guess, showed that she had been healed. So I heard her say she had been healed and everything, but it took her telling me the entire thing again for me to be able to even share that little bit with you. Someday I'm going to get her to sit down and give me an entire interview about what happened, because it was miraculous. But as she was talking, it was almost like the old cartoons, Charlie Brown with the wah, wah, wah. She was talking, I was hearing her, but I wasn't comprehending because I was so upset. All I could hear is that she had cancer that had metastasized. My mind couldn't go past that. It had shut down. So I think sometimes our children just shut down. We use too many words. We talk too long. I'm a big example of that. And we go on and on and on, and they just don't hear us. So stop and ask them, do you know why I'm angry? And then examples. Show your child how to empathize. And they see that from us because we as parents tend to do that. Another way is when another child in the family is hurt, I wouldn't let my kids laugh. Laughing wasn't tolerated. Sure, if the child wasn't really hurt, it might be a little bit funny. But if a child was hurt and they thought it was funny, or they made fun of that person, there was some sort of punishment. That was something I didn't tolerate. And then if the hurt child stuck his tongue out at the others, then this punishment was rescinded. So the kids learned. They learned through example, and they learned with some punishments that I thought fit the bill. Long lectures only go so far. Most of the time, the kids tune you out, just like I tuned my friend out. That is why I use questioning as a teaching tool. So use the example of the spilled ketchup as a way for you and your children to sit down and resolve issues and explain things. Give them a scenario and ask them, how could this issue be resolved? Could the mother have had a safe zone where messes could be reported without harsh punishments? What do you think about the offending child picking up the mess? Would that count for restitution? And they might say, well, what is restitution? Or ask them, what does that mean? You can teach by demonstrating those moments that come up in your homes constantly if your home is like mine, even if you don't have time to deal with them. One of the best ways I've taught my children empathy is through a series of gatherings that we have on occasion, depending on the need, where we would do an activity together. Here's one example. I would have a random drawing of a sibling or parent's name. I'd write them on little pieces of paper and hand them out upside down, and everyone would pull one person's name. And then I would have them go talk to that person and say, how can I pray for you? It can be something like, well, I have a prayer need, but I need it to be private. God knows. Or something like that. Or how can I help you? And then the child can pray for this person daily until the next activity. I learned it is difficult to have animosity toward a person that I pray for daily. Even if I don't want to pray for this person, I do, and it softens my heart. I hope this has helped, and consider using stories like the ketchup story with your children in teaching deeper life lessons. Take care, everybody. God bless. You can find today's episode and show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Look for Inspire Kids to Empathize. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.